Hi, everybody. Anthony Burrows here, your host for Life and Finances with Sacrifice and Service. Now, Monday past, the 8th of March, was Women's International Day, and it passed without much fanfare. It's a time, really and truly, when the world kind of pauses for a moment and they celebrate the achievements over the years of women, that's worldwide, and attempt to raise the awareness of what they would refer to as gender inequality. Now, when you look at it, the world population as a whole, 49.6% are women. In the Bahamas, 51.4% of our population is female. Now, when you look at it, and this has some bearing on the direction of the world, when you look at a country like China, 48.7% of its population happens to be female. And the thing about China is for every 114 males that's born, they have 100 female born. And that's a serious reflection when you look at natural birth. Natural birth, you have 1.07 females to 1.03 male, which is basically 1 to 1. Then you look at a country like Qatar, they have 2.87 males for every 1 female. And this is an indication that some nations are practicing sexual selection, or they're looking at, well, just hey, I want a boy, and so they go ahead and have a boy and do everything they can to have a boy. So if it's a boy, when the woman is pregnant, they bring it. If it's a girl, in essence, all they do is they abort it. And this is the agrarian mindset. Hey, that pervades still to this day. And mainly, I guess, when you look back in years, men wanted boys to work the farms, or they wanted boys to help be part, forming their own little army to be able to defend their town, their village, or whatever, or the nation. And that's the mindset. And this mindset comes about sometimes when you look at it from misunderstanding with religion. That has its role to play in it. Then there's also this notion that guys want to help pass on a legacy, and they want to pass it on through a male child. Now, given a moment of thought, this is the hill / the mountain, that the obstacles also that women have had to overcome in their struggle over the past centuries. You know, when you think about it, I was most amused while doing my research in terms of the origins of Women's International Day. It started in 1909 in New York. 15,000 women demonstrated, and they demonstrated for shorter working hours, better pay, and voting rights. And what they did, straight from 1909 up until 1913, they celebrated it the last Sunday of February up until 1913. Now, the thing is, this was backed by the Socialist Party at the time. And then you found, as you went into Europe, you had Austria, Germany, these are East Bloc countries. And then you had Switzerland, a West Bloc country. And 1911, they estimated that the rallies they had for Women's Day were more than 1 million persons attended the rallies. And their plight was the same, basically right to work, right to be trained and educated, right to vote, right to hold public office, and then to end discrimination against women. Then in 1917, there's a demonstration, the female textile workers. And you know what, we know a textile plant. This was in Europe now, the textile Europe and Russia. The textile worker is basically a person who in a manufacturing plant, and all they do is they spin a bunch of yarns together into cloths or fibers for making cloths or things for cars and what have you, and household goods today. Primarily, this was in Germany and Russia. Now, and those are the nations who were feeling the real brunt of the war, even though everybody was feeling the brunt of World War I. They were seeking to, one, end World War I because they wanted peace. And the thing about it was that there were 20 million deaths in World War I. Then you had 21 million persons wounded, and then you had 10 million civilians also killed. Then they had massive shortage of foods and other things like that. So the ladies had gotten to the point where they was just fed up. And the demonstrations became known as the February and October Revolution. Now, the October Revolution is an official holiday to this day in Russia, which used to be the former Soviet Union. But the thing is, women's rights and women's liberation is often sold in the media, at least was often sold in the media back then, which was trying to turn the man and the crowd against him as a socialist and a communist-backed and advanced ideal or agenda. This primarily in the US and Western Europe. But the thing is, it doesn't matter what your ideologies are. Human needs always come first, because the ladies saw, hey, they saw their men dying, brothers, cousins, uncles, whatever. They saw them dying. Then they were in these factories sun up to sunset. You know, they were in, and then not being treated and all of that, but like they should. But the bottom line is they were feeling tremendous pain. They were feeling tremendous pain, working under poor working conditions with poor pay. And the thing is, they didn't feel as though they had any control over their lives. And they saw society and government as the perceived obstructionist, preventing them from getting ahead. Basically, they were backed into a corner and their hands were forced. Therefore, they combined forces as ladies and men. Some men joined them. And you know what? There's always strength in unity, especially when you're in pursuit of a righteous ideal. Now, today, the day is referred to as International Women's Day, but originally it was called International Women's Day of Struggle. Now, when you come forward to the 70s and 80s, the struggle took on a different turn, especially like in the US, because women now had rights to vote, they had access to education, they had access to jobs. But the newer issues then became, hey, equal pay, further economic opportunity, legal rights just as men, reproductive rights, you know, that's basically saying to have abortion if they want it, which I disagree with, but hey, if that's the rights they pursue. Then they wanted subsidized child care, because you're in a situation where, you know, they're going to go to work and, you know, we had divorce and all those sort of things, then go to work and all of that, and somewhere that they can take the child. And then another issue was violence against women, which is still an issue to this day. Now, in 1975, the UN celebrated, and then in 1977, it officially passed and declared, hey, International Women's Day. When you look, some look at the women's movement today, people look at the women's movement today, especially in Western culture. And when I say Western culture, you're thinking in areas when it looks at the religion, that's Christianity and Judaism, that's the Western culture. And you look at arts, of course, location of your nation, and ethnicity. That's normally white and what have you, but you find that those of us in the Caribbean and the Americas, we fall under Western culture because of the influence of their wealth and resource extraction from us. But anyhow, let's go on. Now, the thing is, when they look at the movement today, comments tend to be, hey, it's diluted, it's watered down, especially when persons look at the commercialism that surrounds it and the amount of corporate sponsorship. And the thing is, the cry that the hardliners and the old-timers would say, hey, we are no longer in pursuit, I shouldn't say we, that the ladies are no longer in pursuit of radical change. And when I hear that, I only laugh and I say to myself, sound like how the church is today and the political parties. You know, everything gets watered down as time goes on, because as you get further away from the origins, things just get diluted. Now, let's bring it on home and look at some of the situation of the struggle of the Bahamian women. And the no further look at, the closest place to look at is the Bahamian women's suffrage movement. Now, this came about because, one, racial discrimination, and you had housing issues because the Bahamians were living, many of them were dilapidated situations, and access to education, access to training, because even when you went on jobs and it was time to be trained with skill and stuff, that was not happening. Child care, because 50% of the women at the time were working, even though society, many people get you to think otherwise, but they were working. And they wanted economic activity, they wanted the right to vote, and then right to hold jobs. And this was here in the Bahamas. Now, the suffrage movement for the Bahamian women was between 1948 and 1962. And the women in the movement came from all walks of life and all political persuasion. Some were UBP, some were PLP, some were Labour. They were from all walks of life. Some were Christians, some were whatever. Now, today, our population, women make up 51.4% of the Bahamian population. So it meant that half of the population couldn't vote. And the thing is, today, 53% of the voters are female. And the thing is, I look at some Burma Road photos in the past. When I say Burma Road, I'm talking about the Burma Road riot. And you saw women in those photos. Now, the thing is, even though they call it the Burma Road riot, the thing actually took place on Bay Street. And of course, there was a whole thing blocking the bridge, blocking access with the airport and all of that sort of stuff. But then, but most of it transpired there on Bay Street, right there around Parliament and what have you. And it's referred to that as the Burma Road riot more so due to the way the Burma colony, which was occupied by the British, which is now, I think, called, I forget what they're called now as a nation. Sorry, I didn't pull that up at the time, right? But that colony had fallen, was in much upheaval, and had basically wrested from the British control. Now, women were a key part of the labor movement of the 50s and the general strike of 1958. And that's the strike when the public and private sectors, they walked off the jobs for 3 solid weeks. 3 weeks, can you imagine that? And the primary leader as far as the women movement was concerned was Mary Ingram. She was the president of she was president of the National Council of Women in 1957. Then other women backing, they had Mabel Walker. And I went to the primary school named after her. Doris Johnson, and everybody knows the school on Prince Charles that's named after her. And Doris Johnson was the first woman to run for office, and she was the first woman appointed in the Senate. Then you have Georgina Simonet, Eugenia Lockhart, Althea Mortimer, Alberta Isaacs, Ethel Kemp, Gladys Bailey, Marge Brown, Grace Wilson, Mildred Moxie. And the thing is, they were primarily considered middle-class women. I guess if we could call it back then, they were primarily women from the middle class. And these were ladies, many of them were very well educated, got access to opportunities and what have you. And some were just your everyday women. Now, in 1958, Doris Johnson gave a powerful speech outside of Parliament after the demonstration in March, which further rallied women and empowered the movement. The thing is, had she been alive to this day, a lady like her could be prime minister. Because one, she had a clear vision, she was a great orator and had the ability for persuasion and had leadership. Things that's so lacking today, not just in the Bahamas, it's a worldwide thing among some of the leaders, but especially in the Bahamas when you think of our own situation. And the groups that kind of made up the movement, you had the lodges, you had churches, and then you had other societal organizations. They led the charge. You see, a strong argument they made was that, hey, we are paying taxes to the government, but we ain't got no representation or even to be able to participate in the process of selecting who should do the governing of them. The suffrage movement at the time, too, was requesting a voting age for 21, that the voting age be 21 and older. And I guess they kind of adhered to that because in 1799, free whites were allowed to vote, and they had to be 21 years and older and paid taxes up to £50 in customs duty, as well as own land. Then in 1807, free blacks were allowed to vote, and they had to be 21 years and older and own land. Now, when you look at voting age around the world, it ranges from 16 to 25. Now, 86% of countries have the age at 18 years old and older. Some countries, which I find very amazing, has it that once you're 18, it's mandatory that you vote. Once you're eligible, that is mandatory that you vote. Can you imagine that? Now, when you're looking at countries that have younger age, you look at Bosnia and Herzegovina, they allow 16-year-olds who are employed to vote. Then Iran's voting age before 2007 was 15. Can you imagine that? Whoa! Then they changed it to 18. Then they changed it back to 15 in 2009. And then 2011, they finally went back to 18 again. You see, but the thing is, by and large, voting age lines up with being able to enlist in the military. Personally, now, I'm in support of 16 as the voting age in the Bahamas because the age of consent for sexual consent is 16. So if a girl could get pregnant, have a baby, she need to be able to have a job and she should be able to vote in terms of, hey, selecting who would then govern this nation and impact her child. And personally, based on my research and all of that, some of the biggest causes for poverty among women is this same age of consent. When they can legally say yes and start having sex at 16, getting pregnant leads them into a situation of poverty. Now, between 1959 and 1960, the Bahamian women really became very active and had more demonstrations and was specifically centered around women's right to vote. The thing is, in 1961, a select committee in Parliament presented favorable report for women to vote. However, and I find this funny, they say, you know what, let them start in 1963. That'll be the best year for them to begin. And you know why? Because in 1962, an election was due. Anyhow, an appeal was made to the British Parliament, and the British Parliament granted the rights for Bahamian women to begin voting in 1962 for that election. And this will be the first time that they would vote, 1962. And the first person to register to vote was July 12, 1962, Ruby Ann Cooper, who became known later on after getting married as Ruby Ann Darling, was the first woman to register to vote. Now, when you look at some of the other countries in the region and their rights to vote, 1944, the Jamaican women got the right to vote. 1946, the Trinidadian women got the right to vote. 1950, Barbadian women, or Barbados as a nation, allowed women the right to vote. In 1920, Canadian and U.S. women right to vote. In 1928, the United Kingdom / Britain females got the right to vote. Now let's look at some of the progress for today. When you look at the University of the Bahamas, 65% of the students are females. And you know, based on education and the way society is structured, getting a good education tends to put persons in better position as far as running and controlling the nation. Well, you all know my position on education. I'm the biggest supporter of it as it is. But anyhow, then you look at, continue along the vein of education, grade level assessment testing. That's students will take it in grade 3 and in grade 6. Boys and girls are basically even there. But when you get BJCs and BGCSEs, girls are outperforming boys now. More girls with A's and more boys with F's. Then you have there are approximately 169 schools in the country. 90% are headed by women. Look at the banking industry. 78% of bank managers are female. 75% of bank executives are female. 58% of board of directors for the banks are female, and that's except for Commonwealth Bank. Then you have it now, women are financially free. You have a lot of women who are financially free. Of course, many are still in the hole because, you know, it's something that financial literacy and financial intelligence isn't highest among human beings because the system is stacked in a way where they want us to just be consumers. But anyhow, women are financially free who pursue that, and many are running businesses. They are business owners, they are civic leaders, political activists, world-class athletes, and entertainers. And then when you look at Bahamas here, they have 3 female captains. They are actually captains, which is tremendous. They're the ones controlling flight. I remember the last one I was on, I think there were 2 female pilots. One was the captain and one was the co-captain, which was interesting. Then in 2018, the Bahamas signed on to the UN, They signed on to the UN Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. Even though I think the Bahamas is one of the freer nations in the world where women can really accomplish all the things that they want. But those obstacles are still there. But we free our mind and then we can climb to the sky. When you look at the public service, we have 20 permanent secretaries, of which 11 are females. And the permanent secretary, that's the highest ranking position as a career civil servant. The permanent secretary advises the minister, and they also carry out policies for the public service. Now, continuing looking at the public service, then directorships, there are approximately 40 directors, and directors are persons who head their own departments. And what they do, they are, like how the permanent secretaries are administrative positions. The directors are considered technical officers, and they specialize in specific areas. And we're saying there are 40 directors, of which the majority are female. We have 18 cabinet ministers, so I guess the deputy and the prime minister then I guess would make, but listed, I think officially listed, that's officially, but there are about 22 of them, and there are only one female minister. Look like the only places women are still being denied full access is politics and the pulpit. Those areas are still somewhat off limit. But now the Bahamian female, the Bahamian woman has come a long way and has been a great help in shaping this Commonwealth. Because when you think about it, Majority Rule 67 wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for the Bahamian female. It would have been, and then 1972, 73 we should say, independence wouldn't have happened. The Bahamian female are responsible for the nation being where we are. And we have to appreciate our females, thank them, support them, and bless them however we can, because without them, we ain't going nowhere. So they've come a long ways and still got a long ways to go. So there's still more that needs to be done for the protection of our women and their children. But if we each stand up and speak up, it'll go a long way for a better tomorrow for our women. So until next time, may the God of heaven and his Son, the Christ, bless and prosper you.